time that it's moving, I can feel it. It's in my heart. Every time that it comes moving my way.
So on guitar, and it, you know, is that what you've been? Is that?
Well, I mean, I teched for about 3 different bands. The most successful was a band. I won't mention their name just because of the stories I want to say. One of the guitar players was a coke dealer who was really good at it. Saved a lot of money and said, "Hey, let's go make a record." I got $50,000. So we went up to a recording studio in Nevada, and he got a group of people that he'd known over the years or whatever like that, and they kind of just sat down and hashed out a bunch of songs, made a record. They printed like 10,000 discs, 10,000.
You mean they coked out a bunch of songs?
Yeah, exactly. But they got somebody to kind of promote them. We went up and down the California coast a few times, went through Nevada, Arizona, back through California, and they were pretty good. I listen to the music now and just think, oh my God, this is terrible. But, at the time it sounded good, so they did pretty well or whatever like that. But, as a musician, personalities don't always mesh. And while they were fine for about 6 months, within about a year or so, they were at each other's throats. So they all kind of went their separate ways. And that's the last time I really worked for anybody major. But I have a few friends that play locally. The music industry here, I don't think it was what it was back when I was growing up. I mean, it was pretty cool back in the early 80s and through the 90s when the industry was real big here. So
I think musicians have become co-opted into corporate endeavors now. I mean, you're basically just selling cars. You're getting on, with the type of work Brave and I were doing for scene cues for movies and other types of things. I think that's where a lot of money is now, since a lot of people are getting their stuff for free as far as the actual music.
The reason that's happening, I think, is because of a good trend, which is the decentralization of distribution, the decentralization of promotion, the fact that you can be anywhere doing this stuff. And what that does is it's taken away a huge revenue source in music, and it's moved it into another place, which is like licensing and these other kinds of things. And I think people are, like young musicians coming up, and artists in general, but musicians also, are quick to learn that their art is a commodity and to find the ways to
I think that's much truer nowadays or whatever like that.
Of course.
Kids definitely know, hey, I can make money doing this. I mean,
it's not so much I can make money doing this. It's,
I think in the hip-hop scene, it's totally about that.
Well, yeah,
it's all about trying to make money. But I think what's interesting for bands now is that there's more money in performing and, getting somebody to buy a ticket for you than there is for them to buy your record or buy your song.
Wow. Yeah, right. That's
but
unbelievable.
That involves a tremendous amount of legwork, though.
Because performing used to be kind of a losing thing for bands, Right. They didn't make money touring. They made money selling records. But
I know, yeah, exactly. It's just flipped now. You have to be a touring band and sell tickets for obscene amounts.
Yeah, my sister just once saw Chris Isaac play down Humphreys, which is a small venue, but tickets for $150 a piece, I think, or something like that. And I mean, he deserves it. He's a great musician, great entertainer, and if they pulled in $25,000 in ticket sales, maybe I'm guessing he saw 10 or 15 of it or something like that.
Sure, exactly. There's our expenses you got to pay. Yeah. It's,
But,
yeah.
I mean, maybe he's not a millionaire, but, I'd like to make $10,000 in a night, that'd be great.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's not $10,000 every night.
Well, not every night, but, I'd be happy making $10,000 a month at this point,
Right.
Every day, so you don't have to remember.
It's this time. Basically, anyone who's listening, if you feel one way or the other, hopefully, if you feel positive about the what you're hearing, and if you enjoy the episodes, to go down iTunes and to rate, the podcast. I think it's like 5 stars or whatever, or add comments. I think our
better get subscribed.
Yeah, well, subscribing is good, but the thing is, iTunes actually, in terms of its rankings, iTunes looks more at things like ratings and comments than it does because it doesn't actually have access to how many people are subscribing. Plus, people could be using other modes of
delivery or whatever.
Stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say then for this sort of shameless promotion, which is the only shameless promotion you'll get because there is no corporate sponsorship at all.
Yeah, because it's not. What are we promoting? We're just asking people to get involved and just sort of join in on the conversation if they want.
Right. So that what we're talking about is we're pretty much fully responsible for.
Yeah, but we're responsible for it in as much as anyone at a coffee shop is responsible for what they say. You know what I mean? You're essentially in public. You're essentially saying your mind. We're not beholden to any sponsors or to any networks or to anything.
Why do you have to get defensive about it? It was persuasive.
Oh, sorry.
No sponsors, no filter, right?
Thank you. Oh, G. Edit point. Right. Well, there you go. You always have to flub. You have to break the seal on the first name mistake.
Yeah, we'll get it a few times. Problem is, once we get 3 people going, like when there's just the 2 of us, we will not necessarily you don't necessarily have to say the person's name that often. But when there's 3 of us, sometimes you need to say I'm directing this to this person or that person, and so I think we have more name drops.
Well, that's why rappers like the Beastie Boys that had 3 rappers would always say their names or pass it off with the name.
Oh, really?
During the rap, I'm Mike D and I get respect. You cash in your jewelry is what I expect. Oh, it's just back to MCA. MCA, I got a license to kill.
It's kind of like passing solos around in a jazz.
Now that's interesting. I never had really considered that, but that absolutely makes sense. Because 3 guys going like they did, that's not an easy task by any means.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're just spitting, so you have to have some type of organization to the spit.
But it was also of the style, in the 80s, that whole I'm blank blank and I'm here to say I like something in a major way. Early hip hop raps kind of all began that way, or at least
put your hands in the air.
That's true. I remember somebody interviewing Will Smith about why rappers made such actors. The confidence and the cockiness of, really thinking you were the bomb or whatever you want to call it, really is pervasive in that culture or whatever like that, whereas rock and roll guys, half the time they're not even looking at the stage when they perform, they're so entranced in what they're doing, And,
but that's a kind of a cockiness, isn't it? Sort of
an arrogance, I guess you could say.
But a dismissiveness.
Yeah. Yngwie Malmsteen did that. He did certain type of solo when I saw him one time. And he went behind the amp and did it so nobody could watch him do it. And I heard Eddie Van Halen used to kind of do that as well. So.
Well, it's also it goes back to the Miles Davis, turning his back on the audience and
I really thought about that.
But for the audience looking at that, it's a horrible visual. You're sort of why am I looking at his back?
Well, I do know that he may have been taking a note. Yngwie, I knew that Paganini from, I don't know what the dates are, but the violinist Paganini in the 1800s, 1700s was a big influence.
It was mid to late 1800s, yeah.
Thank you, yeah. And I guess Paganini, I think, did certain things like that with his audience as well.
Hiding behind Marshall stacks?
Well, whatever the equivalent of Marshall stacks.
If he had them, he'd have used them.
That's true.
Big wigs, I don't know, powdered wigs.
Oh, maybe that's what he was doing behind the stacks, huh?
What any musician does, they're either puking or, telling a groupie where the room number is.
There you go.
I was reading this great a series of articles on prog rock. It was on Slate. We can put a link to it if people are interested. It was a 5-part series on prog rock and sort of really taken to task a little bit of the history, not just saying the history of the prog rock, but also talking about the history of its reception. How did it go from being literally the biggest thing in rock to suddenly being almost a joke? And it talks about it. But one of the things they talk about is I think it was, was it ELP or Yes? Might have been Yes. And at some point they had these shows that would just go on forever and ever and ever. And at one point, I think it was a drummer or something it was a the keyboardist.
Keith Emerson.
Keith Emerson.
Rick Wakeman.
he literally had a guy under his stack of keyboards who would like, I don't know, he would like give him food, or like he was like sort of his assistant, and he would like, you know, maybe change voices, or it was basically sort of this assistant that would hide under his keyboards. And at one point, like the guy like takes an Indian restaurant order from Rick Wakeman like in the middle of a concert, and is literally like feeding him, you know, like chicken vindaloo or whatever in the middle of a concert, and whoever the lead singer is like smells this like savory chicken smell, and he kind of walks over and like asks for some food, and so he comes away with like a dumpling of some kind, and so they're literally like, just because they're like just jamming away forever and ever, they're eating on stage just to keep themselves going.
Wow. I mean, you come up with your own routine when you're touring like that, and you are an artist. The sky's the limit with the type of routine that you become comfortable with, you know.
But with
like,
prog rock, it was so extravagant, and like, you know what I mean? We have so many pounds of gear and so much spectacle.
Oh, I remember seeing ELP back in the 70s had like 3, you know, full 18-wheelers, and for the time, you know, well, one had an E, one had an L, one had a P on it, or whatever like that. And for somebody at that time to be, you know, dragging gear around like that was unheard of.
Well, they essentially invented stadium rock. I mean, just
in a way, yeah. I saw a similar thing on that. In fact, I just rewatched the Rush documentary, and you know how they were right on the edge of being super popular, but because they played progressive rock and they played really long songs, you know. The mainstream, you know, Rolling Stone magazines like that would never give them props at all, you know, and they always kind of felt like they were a little bit on the outside. But I remember listening to a John Paul Jones interview from Led Zeppelin, and somebody was asking him about the solos. He goes, "Oh, the solos are great, you know, get your chance to go backstage, sit down for a while, have a drink or whatever like that, do whatever else you wanted to do or whatever like that, and okay, Bonzo's almost done with the solo. We can go back out there and finish the song off, and you know, it's a breather
I remember
for
seeing
him.
the song remains the same. They just all left the stage.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Page did the huge long guitar solo. John Paul Jones did a
organ thing or whatever.
Yeah, I can't think of the song right now.
No, I think it was No Quarter, was it?
No Quarter, yeah. And I mean, speaking of Paganini, he would throw everything into it, and Keith Emerson kind of used to do the same thing. He, you know, find some classic, you know, show tune or something like that he'd kind of go off on for a while and then reprise it back into the music.
Yeah, like they were doing like Leonard Bernstein's America.
But I was really surprised to hear that there's a section of heavy metal that's really gotten into the prog rock thing all over again. And
it's I don't know. There's like math rock, and then there's like I'm sure there's like math metal.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dream Theater is a group that kind of got into doing that, and they've been doing it for quite a while. But there's been a couple other bands that, you know, have such a hard, grinding, heavy sound, and they're like, oh, I was a total Genesis fan, I was a total Yes fan, I was a total, you know, UFO fan or whatever, you know.
Well, when you listen to some of those, like the interactions between the drums and the bass on some of those, it's funny to think of a tiny sliver of metal that is basically the descendants of prog.
Yeah.
Because some of those, like, they're really super intricate.
Oh, yeah. You know, I mean, that's, I don't want to say that's where the musicianship has kind of gone to now. I mean, you know, there are definitely other musicians that are of that level, but, you know.
Well, I think you got, there's some bands.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just thinking bands that emerged, like Tool.
Exactly.
Incubus. Which is, it actually hit more of a pop. Like, they were pop progressive.
Yeah.
You know? I just remember all this because I was given guitar lessons throughout this time, and the kids were all coming in, hey, I want to play this, hey, I want to play that. So I kind of almost saw it as sort of a modern pop culture lesson for me. I was sort of see what the kids are getting into.
Yeah.
And Incubus really struck me. I was like, well, all right, here we go. There's some at least virtuosic talent with what's happening here. And Tool, the same thing. They have their own. I mean, it's almost a cult with what's happening with Tool. And as far as the early prog, I'm not too well versed on it. I mean, I know a couple of the bands that were going on.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't even think about Rush as being part of those bands.
They were a little later, and they also broke through a little more.
Yeah,
but
I mean, if you want to think about
back.
progressive bands, you know, I think of like Genesis and Yes.
King Crimson.
King Crimson. Yeah, in fact, to talk about the metal thing, Robert Fripp made a very comment that he goes, all your good best guitar players out there now are speed metal guys.
Yeah.
You know, because he was always into doing that really heavy stuff. I mean, I saw the second version of King Crimson back in 1982, and they had Tony Levin, who plays bass and stick for Peter Gabriel, Adrian Belew, who played for Frank Zappa, Bill Bruford, who played for, I think he played for Brand X and a couple other, other heavy progressives. I think even Bill Bruford did an album with Yes, in fact. So,
it's funny you bring up Zappa. I feel like
Zappa's like a
how did he
like
kind of avoid? But how did he avoid the kind of the stigma / label of being just put into a prog rock thing? I mean, like, he would write these novelty songs, like Yellow Snow and whatever.
Because he composed. He composed Yellow Shark as well. I mean, he was, he composed avant-garde symphonies.
That's what I'm saying. But his whole tactic was to basically bring in like young men under the auspices of coming to hear these goofy songs like Yellow Snow and also like these, rock and stuff, and then suddenly spend 20 minutes playing stuff from, Yellow Shark or from other stuff just to kind of like just clue them into the stuff that he was doing that he was most interested in. But the idea is that you couldn't really he wasn't just doing purely one thing or the other.
No, I mean, where progressive rock's usually very serious, and the musicians, are
almost
not exactly
fault,
what you call humorous. Zappa just, he was a brand unto himself. I mean, he joked, he goes, I'm an okay guitar player, and, he goes, always get somebody else to do the tough stuff or whatever like that. But I think people were just attracted to him because his music was so different and so conceptual or whatever like that. And the part about, the humor in his music and stuff like that was something they just probably either learned to deal with or enjoyed or whatever. I mean, I remember Adrian Belew came out in a dress on stage one time when he played or whatever like that. So the humor wasn't just necessarily in the music; it was in the visual.
And
as
I think that was part of the draw. That was part of the appeal.
Yeah,
is that it made it accessible.
But well, that's true.
And you could play off complexity rhythmically, harmonically, whatnot as a sort of goof. You can kind of goof off on it.
But
Zappa was always trying to reconcile style and commercialism versus pure musical creativity and virtuosity. And he, I think, recognized the tools of virtuosity that were obviously inherent in prog music. And so I think he may have not cared for the style. He always made fun of it in his music. He's like, and look at that big A-bomb. And but he'd make fun of modern videos. He always made fun of the type of thing that, made people go commercial, thus less real, less honest, So he just took the prog rock virtuosity and said, he just saw it as a tool. He's like, hey, I can play guitar which I think he's fantastic. His tone is ridiculous.
There's a certain song he had, I think it's called Tinseltown Rebellion. He goes, but to get a record contract, they would have to sound more punk, forget their chops and play real dumb, or else they would be sunk. So off they go to SIR to learn some stupid riffs and practice all their poses in between their powder sniffs.
See, you can't, that's great. Like, it's just littered with those types of critiques.
But just being self-aware in that sense and understanding your context and then being willing to mock it, because you don't have to necessarily be willing to mock it, but being able to recognize it, I think it keeps you from being, because I think what you just made a good point, which is that he didn't mistake the style and then the technique that led to that style as the thing itself. Like, it's a means to an end. Like, the technique is a means to an end. And oftentimes I think that in a lot of prog and even in a lot of metal or math rock or whatever, there's a fetishization of the technique, a fetishization of the elements of the music that never allow you to transcend, go beyond, and actually reach other thing. Like, you know what I mean?
One of the first conversations I had with B here is we talked about Yngwie, because I'd seen him down at the Roxy, and I said, "You ever see the movie Amadeus?" And he's written the big wild part or whatever, and all the other guys go, "Well, it was really good, but there were too many notes," and certain groups, it's like, whoa, man, it's like, input overload, whereas like I'm going to go see Eric Johnson this Sunday down in San Juan Capistrano at the Coach House. Eric has so many different styles he plays that you never go and see him and say, it was the same concert I saw before. He's always mixing it up, and just the way he goes through so many different tones,
But let me get his tone though. Like, see, to me, I was just thinking that his tone to me is the one consistent thing that I hear. Now, I haven't heard that much, but a couple of the concerts I heard at the G3, his tone is just so singing, so attack free. Like it's like one of the you can barely hear his attack on the string. It's just what happens afterwards. There's a certain compression that happens there with that. I mean, I love it. I love the way his tone sings.
I mean, he's got about 3 good tones that are 3 that I think he kind of goes through. He has a clean one and a kind of a dirty one. Then he has a real fuzzy one. In fact, I think he sells a pedal now called the Fuzz Face that I think kind of like has his kind of trademark sound on it. But I've seen him play in different places, and when you get him in a club of about 500 or 600 people, which is how the Coach House is, and you can actually hear his amps as opposed to hearing him going through another system or whatever like that. It's just I just never get tired of hearing that sound, whether it be his dirty sound, his clean sound, or whatever. But
it's just creamy goodness. He's like vanilla chocolate.
Yeah, there you go.
He's just velvet, just that classic Cliffs of Dover sort of singing.
And it's interesting because that was kind of his peak or whatever in popularity, I could say, or whatever. Right. And he's put out so much music. And I just, I never hear it on the radio anymore. It's kind of sad. So we're talking to Prog Rock. It's kind of interesting that there's been some other stuff that comes through. But I'm a big Jeff Beck fan too. When's the only time I hear Jeff Becker Johnson is when I listen to satellite radio. And that's.
But I think that's also speaking to the change in the distribution of music, especially on things like radio. Like radio's become so monopolized and so consolidated that. To have what you had in the early mid 70s, where you could basically have these disc jockeys that were basically like let loose, and you can play an 8-minute song, an 11-minute song, and not have to worry about
It's called album-oriented rock.
That doesn't really exist anymore.
No, it doesn't, because what happened was, and I did a term paper on this in the social media grad school. And I couldn't prove it, but remember what happened in the 80s was MTV, and we don't have to go on that. I'm just saying video killed the radio star literally. But back to what you were saying about they don't play it that much. Did you have a point there?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I think it has to do with advertisers and consolidation of demographics, meaning that according to, I think it was in this same Slate article, they talked about how radio stations had pressure on them to basically surround one very specific distinctive style and corral a demographic so that they can go to the advertisers and say, these are exactly the kind of people we have listening to us. These are exactly the kind of products that we can advertise, and we can give you X amount of spots. And so that kind of targeted demographic, I think, whittled down the kind of eclecticism that was in radio up until probably the mid-late 70s.
Right, and that allowed people like Jeff Beck to actually have some play. I mean, remember, Jeff Beck wasn't a stranger to pop success. I mean, he was one of the Yardbirds,
mid-60s,
and Jimmy Page. So they achieved and made their networks and made some money in the Yardbirds and got their pop tunes out there. And I think they all at that point were like, I'm done with this early Beatles-esque feel. I'm done with it because I'm a player. I respect what I do. And they all redefined the genre. I mean, they've all influenced my life as a guitar player. And, you're right. Jeff Beck, back to what I was going to say, one of the most amazing guitarists, like what he does with that tremolo bar is ridiculous. I mean, he makes the thing purr, and I saw him, I believe he was playing the blues with Mick Jagger and I don't want to get political with this, so I'm just going to say at one of the Obama concerts, because Obama reminds me of the Emperor Nero. He just has music going on all the time. He's got like that same sort of mentality, like this step-by-step, walk to just narcissism and megalomania, but you can barely see it. But anyway, sorry, that had to get in there. But you can see him in the concerts, and Jeff Beck is playing, and he pulls out some great licks, like it right there, like as the jester for the king. It was beautiful.